It's the Gopher podcast with Mike Grimm, episode number 17. I am Mike Grimm, voice of the Golden Gophers, and welcome back to the podcast. We're going to talk Golden Gopher football again this week. It's the Gopher podcast preview of the Gopher football spring game. We'll hear from the beat writer of Gopher football from the St. Paul Pioneer Press, one of our favorites, Andy Greder. He'll break down spring ball and preview the spring game. Our Gopher podcast is presented by alumni-owned Sunbelt Business Advisors and True North Mergers and Acquisitions. If you're a business founder planning to exit your business, start by contacting Sunbelt Business Advisors and True North Mergers and Acquisitions. Sunbelt serves more businesses up to $5 million in revenue than anyone, and True North M&A serves companies with revenues up to $150 million. Get a confidential, no-cost, no-obligation business valuation started today. Make the most of your life's work. Visit sunbeltminnesota.com or tnma.com today. Our thanks to Brian Slipka, who oversees both of those great organizations. It was my pleasure to help with their all-company breakfast last week. It was fun to see everybody. Our podcast is also sponsored by State Farm agent Tony Hoagland at ChamplinInsurance.com. Tony, as we mentioned last week, loves Golden Gopher football. We invite you to subscribe to the podcast. You can go back and listen to the Gopher podcast from weeks gone by. For example, last week, we had Golden Gopher offensive coordinator Kirk Shiraka on the podcast. I'd invite you to go back and have a listen for some fascinating behind-the-scenes football talk. More football talk this week. Andy Greder from the St. Paul Pioneer Press is next on the Gopher podcast. First, a word from Tony.
Hey, Gopher fans, this is your State Farm agent, Tony Hoagland. We are super excited to be part of the new Mike Grimm Show on Talk North. For the year of 2022, we will be donating $10 to the University of Minnesota Children's Masonics Hospital for everyone that calls our office or checks in with us online and mentions that they heard about us on Talk North and the Mike Grimm Show. We are really excited again that Mike came on board with Talk North. You can reach us at 763-421-4900. You can find us on the web at ChamplinInsurance.com. Again, 763-421-4900, or find us on the web at ChamplinInsurance.com. Roll the boat, Sky Yuma, go Gophers.
It's episode number 17, the Gopher podcast with Mike Grimm. Thrilled to be joined now by the St. Paul Pioneer Press beat writer for Gopher Athletics, Pacific football, and men's basketball. And most of this podcast, I believe, we'll spend talking football. I may save at the end a little basketball nugget or two, as there's some news certainly in recent weeks with the men's basketball program as well. Andy Greder, good to see you, sir.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Mike. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing your perspective on this spring football season. And it's always, hard to get a real great read sometimes. And, you get to watch a little here and hear a little there. And we'll find out more here as you and I talk. It's Wednesday night of spring game week, so to speak. And this podcast will likely, most people will listen on a Thursday, Friday, or maybe even Saturday. And if they catch it after the spring game, a lot of what we say, the spring game may not have a lot of impact on some of the projections we may make as we look ahead to the fall 2022 season. So there may be some shelf life to some of this as well as we head into the summer workouts. But first of all, what are your general impressions? I know you've gotten to be in on a few practices. You know who, who's gone from the team, who some of the newcomers and transfers are. What's your general impression of this Golden Gopher football team?
Yeah, I think the biggest question mark is what they do on the offensive and defensive line. Obviously, they lost, I think, 6 of their top 8 defensive linemen when it came to snap counts, and 4 of their 5 starters on the offensive line. And those are the 2 big issues that they got on both sides of the ball. And John Michael Schmitz is obviously a huge key that he came back. Their all Big Ten center. He wasn't at practice yesterday, and his absence was glaring. I think they get pretty young, pretty inexperienced pretty quickly. J.J. Gade, who's one of their tackles, he's missed all of spring, and that's kind of exposed some lack of depth at tackle as well. So I think offensive line, is maybe a bigger concern than defensive line. I think you can see some of the pieces that they've got defensively in the transfers that they've added, and some of the guys stepping up into bigger roles on the defensive line. But offensive line, it looks a little bit glaring right now. Quinn Carroll is still at Notre Dame. So when he gets in June, his arrival is going to be a big boost for this offensive line. It sounds like they're going to kind of wait and see where he's going to play. It looks like tackle is maybe more of a need, but he can also play guard. But offensive and defensive line is really going to be the biggest key for this team to replace if they're going to have the same kind of success and challenge for a Big Ten West like they want to.
And it's interesting because we've, whoever has been the coach at Minnesota or wherever, or spring is the time where you hear them oftentimes say, well, we like who we have right now, even though they're unproven. And I definitely, and sometimes coaches will say that and maybe not believe it. I do think in this case, they feel good about those offensive linemen you talked about that are kind of have been waiting in the wings. Because let's face it, without the COVID year, most of those guys would have been playing last year. Now, to what results, who knows? But I think generally they are excited about those guys, but it's different to watch them in practice and go through drills as opposed to lining up against, that 3-4 front of Wisconsin at some point.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the biggest praise is for Ariante Ursary. I think they really love what he's going to be able to provide. I think he had one start in that Nebraska game when they were decimated by COVID in 2020. And he looks the part. He looks like he can be a starting left tackle. And PJ is multiple times, I think he's done it with you and with us yesterday on Tuesday going into the spring game. I just had huge praise for him, said he might be the best offensive lineman that he's ever had. And that's pretty impressive when you look at what's going to come in the NFL draft and maybe one or two guys that get picked there. So they like him. Chuck Filiaga, I think the Michigan transfer obviously has a lot of experience. They've talked about him as a leader. John Michael Schmitz has done that. PJ has done that as well. They've got some pieces to be able to move around. It sounds like Nathan Bowe has played all 5 offensive line spots, and he's going to really be a glue guy I think they'll count on. So I think, they've got some guys that have played some football. Axel Rushmeyer as well, also in that mix. So, there's guys that have played football, but I think we kind of were spoiled a little bit last year, just given how much continuity they had on the offensive line for so long and really kind of benefited from, an opportunity to play 5 and 6 and 7 offensive linemen like they did under Mike Sanford. I think that we were maybe a little spoiled with how much continuity and quality they had.
Yeah, and we'll see where that takes him. You mentioned Rushmeyer and Bowe. They both, I think, have a start or two. I think Rushmeyer started most of that 2020 season and then kind of that guy was playing fullback last year in certain I formation goal line situations where they line the quarterback Tanner Morgan up under center. So I agree. I think that's going to be one of the interesting spots. And in the Big Ten, the offensive line is so important. And when Carroll gets here, we'll see, is it tackle? What's Gaday's situation? It's really a shame with Gaday too, because we've been hearing about him. They beat out some good programs to get him here. And I think his dad had a connection with, was it Callahan maybe over the years? And here was his chance maybe to really stake a claim to that right tackle spot. And unfortunately, health has not allowed him to really go out and claim it yet at this point.
Yeah, I think that, he's a guy that's been in the wings for a while now and have heard good things about. If there's a time to be heard, it's in spring ball and not in the fall. So you hope that it's something, small and minor and he'll be ready to go once they start fall camp or even summer workouts in June.
You mentioned that, obviously line play is important. And on the other side, maybe through transfer as well and some other things, they, obviously have Thomas Rushback who put up good numbers. When you look at the numbers, his name is amongst the top returning sackmen in the Big Ten, right? And he kind of rotated in there with Boye Mafe, who obviously they're going to miss. And then Asezi Atomewo and some others kind of played the other side of that. So you got Rush and then some guys that have played. Trill Carter, has started games and, there's some other guys there, they're going to miss Mike Adu. He was kind of that guy that just took up space. And they've got a Clemson transfer and some others, and they're excited. I know they're really excited about some of their young defensive ends and, some edge opportunities there. What do you see on that side of the ball up front, that front four?
Yeah. I think, you mentioned the Clemson transfer, Darnell Jeffers. He's a guy that's played a lot of football, as well as Lorenzo Surgers. He's made some real impact plays on the edge for this Gophers defense. I think both of those guys are going to be key for them as they come in and try to plug and play with some of those guys. Obviously the Houston Baptist FBS kid that's coming in as well. They lost, was it Chris Smith from Harvard? He went to Notre Dame. They were going to have him as a kind of a third defensive lineman to come in. And is it Kyrie? I forget his last name. But yeah, he's a Houston Baptist guy who I think he had 50 some tackles. Obviously it's the FCS level, but to have a nose, have 50 some tackles at any level, I think is impressive. And he's going to be another transfer that's coming in. Kind of on the edge, Jaw Joyner, Jalen Logan Redding are two guys that I think are going to have an opportunity to really step up and play those edge spots. So those are kind of keys for them. I see, is it Logan Richter? Yeah. He's been playing inside as well. He's a load. You talk about
big man.
McAdoo Treadway as a guy that just eats up space. Logan Richter is even bigger than McAdoo was. So I think they'll look for him to kind of step into that role. I think it's even his third or fourth year now, and it's really an opportunity for him to pop.
Yeah, we've been waiting for him to get a chance, and he'll get that chance. And I'd throw one other name on the edge, too. I think Austin Booker, they're excited about, a kid from Indiana who, as a true freshman last year, turned some heads. Didn't play in games, or if he did, it wasn't much. But I think that'd be another guy that maybe he's going to get some pressure on the quarterback and try to disrupt some things back there. And they have a new defensive line coach as well. Brick is in, and he's been everywhere. It looks like. I mean, you look at his resume, and he's been NFL. He's been big time college football. He's been at the smaller levels of college football. I mean, that guy brings some experience here.
Yeah, he's quite the character. I was watching the defensive line at one time, and he was really laying into the guys. He was getting after them, no doubt. Encouraging, but also something that you probably couldn't have on the airwaves without an explicit label on it, just because he was really getting after him. But I think it was upbeat. It was encouraging for the most part, and yeah, he's got a good story. He's got a foundation that he gives back to the community with. So it just seems like a good fit to be here in Minnesota with PJ Fleck and the Row the Boat Foundation and those kinds of things. Going back to Austin Booker, he was a guy that with the Haufers, with the freshmen that PJ talked about a lot, is making a lot of splash plays. And we saw that during the open practice on the Saturday a couple of weeks ago. He came unblocked off the edge on a goal line play and had a tackle for loss. And he's kind of rangy and twitchy. And I think, he's a guy that I overlooked, but I think he's a guy that, in his first full year of college football is going to be an impact player, it looks like.
Yeah, and obviously if they end up where they want to end up, they want to be competing in November to try to get to Indianapolis. They were, they've been now a couple of times in the last few years just a really a win away from it, depending on where that win might fall. And so those guys are going to have to make plays, right? Guys that maybe we haven't seen. And that's what programs that show up and go to those go to that game, particularly from the West. If you see, basically it's been Northwestern, Wisconsin, and Iowa the last, decade almost. I guess it wouldn't be a full decade, but you get what I'm saying. And that's what happens there. Iowa last year, I remember we were in Indianapolis and everyone was talking about, what about the defensive line? They lost a bunch of guys, and that might have been the strength of their defense. Obviously, they got a good linebacking core as well, but now Minnesota has to fall in line with that as a developmental program that guys maybe we haven't heard of, or maybe only diehard fans have heard of. By week 3, they're going to have to be popping and ready to go for Big Ten play. And that's how you end up at places like the Big Ten championship game.
Yeah, I think what's encouraging is they've hit in the transfer portal on a lot of guys as well, right? Yeah. Obviously, you need to be a developmental program and have those freshmen become sophomores and juniors and seniors and come up that way. But, they've also have hit multiple times through the transfer portal. If you look at Jack Gibbons, or if you look at Niles Pinckney or McAdoo Treadway, who we mentioned. I'm sure we'll get into other guys on the defensive side of the ball, especially at cornerback, who they're high on, some of the guys they brought in there. But, they've got a good track record for the most part of hitting on guys that either have come over from a blue blood program, or guys that they feel like can step up to play at this level, from Abilene Christian in particular, or Western Kentucky. And they've really had a lot of success there. So I think that kind of gives confidence that they're going to be able to plug and play at those positions where they've gone to the portal and tried to address needs.
Yeah, if and they have been, smart about targeting the right people and the right fits at the spot that is of need, and they've hit on, as you mentioned, a few of them. To me, one of the big storylines going into the spring, because honestly, nobody really knew for sure, was at running back what was Trey Potts' situation, and to a lesser degree, Mohamed Ibrahim's situation. And, obviously with his injury, there was, we figured he'd be back at some point. Trey Potts, really, that was, and still has been one of the better kept secrets, in terms of really what that whole situation was so scary at Purdue. Remember, as that post-game show started and we're looking over and we're like, what the heck is going on? And I mean, your heart sinks a little bit when you see how that all unfolds. The good news is they both have been practicing, in terms of how much clearance they're going to get. They're not going to play Saturday. We know that in the spring game. But I thought that answered two important questions, is that it looks like in the fall, those are two guys that are going to get to play football for this team.
Yeah, it's all signs are pointing to that's going to be the case. I was watching the running backs at practice on Tuesday, and it was interesting just to see. I mean, they were doing some stuff on air, but they were just running this kind of simple angle route. And you watched Mo do it, and you watched Trey do it, and then you watched some of the other guys do it. And there was a noticeable drop off. There was a crispness, a burst, a snap to the way that Mo and Trey did it that showed me, okay, there doesn't look to be any sort of lingering issues with these guys. And now it was on air, and, it was kind of by just the look of it. But then you saw, Zach Evans or Bryce Williams do it, or some of the walk-ons that they have playing at that position now because of how much turnover, injuries, and transfers and things. But it was just a noticeable difference of, okay, those are the dudes in that spot, guys that we know that can play there. And they looked the part just in a simple drill of looking to be 100% back. And we'll see if they're able to kind of follow through with that. But yeah, all signs point to them being the guys. And I think that's maybe why you saw Bucky Irving hit the portal, because he knew that, hey, those guys are back, and PGA likes to ride the running backs that he has. So I think that it bodes well that you see those guys do the things that they're doing in spring practice, even if it isn't with clearance for contact.
Yeah. And both those guys, when they had their chances, obviously Muhammad has really, proven himself over the years as a workhorse, and Trey Potts, until that scary injury, was doing yeoman's work as well. Now the question becomes, as you mentioned, with Bucky Irving in the portal, and that again is one of the secrets. I haven't heard really what's going on there, and there's been no announcement. We shall see where that all heads. But if what happened last year happens again, and let's hope that doesn't, because you get through some running backs and there's injuries, and all of a sudden you're fourth and fifth string guys, and in one case you get to the sixth string guy. If that happens, this team is going to have a bunch of inexperienced guys trying it. So you hope that Potts and Ibrahim are fully healthy. Bryce Williams obviously had an injury as well, but he's been practicing. But after that, there's no experience basically in terms of gameplay left. Yeah. So knock on wood, throw whatever salt over your shoulder, whatever luck. If you're a Gopher fan, you're going to keep your fingers crossed at that top three. And I know they like the youngster from Texas. He's showing flashes. I got a kick. He was wearing number 26 in spring ball. I don't know if that's where he'll stay, but I'm like, yeah, he's wearing Saquon Barkley's number. Let's have some Saquon Barkley performance, because that guy was an amazing college running back. But let's hope that they stay healthy, because the depth is with the transfers. That's an issue.
Yeah, that would be some really asininely horrible luck to get hit to that level again, right? I think, just talking with Kenny Burns about it for the Guaranteed Rate Bowl, and, he's been around the game for a long time, played at Indiana and has coached a lot of places and been immersed in college football for a long time. And he said he'd never seen anything remotely close to that. One position group that hit time and time again by injuries. So yeah, if it happens again, then, there's something desperately wrong with the luck that they've had. But, I think, you just look at what Mo was able to do in 2020 and how healthy he was. It's not something that's been, a career long type thing. Trey had kind of a fluky thing. Bryce had an ankle. So it's one of those things where you think, okay, maybe these one-offs and those guys can stay healthy and productive.
Yeah, indeed, no doubt. You had an article on the quarterback room with I guess new offensive coordinator Kirk Shiraka, who's the old offensive coordinator. He was on this show last week. He was a guest of me here on the podcast. I maybe am. One, I like to hear myself talk, so I love the podcast. But it was really fun to talk to him and get into not so much like, hey, what do you see from the quarterback, which we talked about some of that stuff, but just like preparation? How much film do you watch? How do you go about putting together some stuff? So if people haven't heard it, they should go back. But you also wrote a little bit on it as well, and how this quarterback room has emerged. And for him, he's had a hand in all these quarterbacks. It's not like maybe when Mike Sanford came in where he knew none of those guys. He has had a hand in either recruiting or literally coaching two of the top three guys.
Yeah, for sure. It was interesting just talking with Tanner about his relationship with Shiraka and how it's changed over the years. Because obviously, they recruited him to Western Michigan and brought him here, and he sat on the bench behind, Demery Croft and Connor Rhoda in 17, and then got his chance with Zach in 18, and obviously 19. Everybody remembers what they did together. But Tanner talked about how he was, quote, terrified of Kirk Shiraka when he first came in 2017 as the wide-eyed true freshman. And now he's willing to say, yeah, Kirk, I don't like that play. And Shiraka was like, wait a second, you didn't used to do that? He's like, he joked, he's like, no talking back, kind of. But that's what I think is what's healthy about this relationship now is they're able to kind of share, or Tanner is able to share what he likes and doesn't like about certain plays. And Tanner then is also able to ask Kirk about why he is insisting on this play, what he feels is beneficial about running it, what kind of mismatch do they see on the field. And I think you're really able to see, obviously you want to see that in a sixth-year quarterback reunited with his offensive coordinator that he knows so well, that they're able to take it to that next level. And I think that's really what stood out to me is just a comfort level between those two guys. I've seen Kirk ride Tanner during practices, so there definitely is a coach-player relationship, but I think there is a little bit more freedom and ease to kind of take it to that next level and share things a little bit more intimately than they probably had in 18 and 19 as well.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. I think so. And I think, in talking to Kirk last week, Kirk Shiraka, about some of it, part of one of the fascinating things is I'm fascinated by play calls, and everything else and game flow and all that. And, even when things are going well, sometimes one play call can short circuit, a game for 10 minutes if it's the wrong play call. So I always am fascinated by it. And last week he talked about, going all the way back to when he coached Joe Flacco at Delaware and, Zach Terrell, who was so good at Western Michigan, led them to that 13-win season. That part of his deal is to find that perfect spot and how much do I put on the quarterback's plate, not just for the season, but like this week we're playing these guys, they do this, how much can he handle? And he's like, he always wants to make it his mistake, not the quarterback's mistake. So like if the quarterback doesn't maybe have as good of a game, then he's like, I feel that's on me because I either gave him too much or sometimes too little. And that's an interesting way to look at how you handle the quarterback week to week.
Yeah, no doubt. I think it'll be interesting to see how much of the offense do we see that looks like 2019 and how much of it is kind of an evolution of it. I mean, I think the more we hear about what Kirk has said about his time away for those last 2 years and how much the game has changed or evolved. And it seems like there's going to be some new wrinkles. I think there's going to be some bread and butter that they're going to go back to, talking with Chris Ottman-Bell, he said, hey, we're taking shots again and we're stretching the field. And I think every Gopher fan is going to be encouraged by that because, we saw an offense that was really stuck in some tendencies and some run heavy type looks. And I think everybody knows how frustrating that was last year that led to Mike Sanford Jr. being let go. So I think, Kirk Shiraka mentioned to the media when he spoke to them that he says, everybody in the state of Minnesota knows we have to throw the ball better.
Yeah.
And he knows that. And I think that's really the focus of how they're approaching what they want to see this fall.
And I think if you even look back last year, speaking of what Ottman-Bell mentioned, to me, maybe the two most impressive wins were the home win against Wisconsin and then the road win at Purdue. Like that one is, no one pays attention to how good that win is. I mean, you win, at Purdue. Right. Purdue beat Michigan State and Iowa, right? Two of the top probably 4 teams in the league, ended up with 9 wins, and you went in and beat them there. And guess what? That was a game that they didn't outgain Purdue, but they hit 2 big plays, right?
Yes,
and it was one of the few games they did decide to stretch the field. Ottman-Bell was a piece of that. I know Mike Brown-Stevens, if memory serves, had a long pass reception in that game as well. So there's no doubt sometimes you just have to take the top off. Even if it's an incomplete, it can serve a purpose, right?
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, I mean, I think those were both play action passes too, right? And you kind of break some tendencies by doing it kind of early on in the drive or early on in the script of, first, second, third down. Going back to that Purdue game, obviously it looks better in hindsight just because it happened the first game of October. But what I was reminded of today when I was doing a story on Boye Mafe is, that came after the Bowling Green loss, right?
Yeah.
And that was devastating for what this team thought of itself and what they were on that Saturday. To then go on the road at Purdue and win the way that they did, or just win period and bounce back was really key for this season to show that, okay, they were a good team and they could prove it after a really, really difficult loss.
Yeah, and I think they did not have Mariano Sori-Marin for a good chunk of that game as well.
That's right. He had an ankle injury.
Had an ankle, so they stepped up, made the plays when they had to, and Newman had the interception late to seal it when most Gopher fans were getting a little nervous there as Purdue was marching down the field. So, you make some plays, you stretch the field, and you get a big road win there. And you're right, it righted the season because that could have, coming off that Bowling Green game, could have, turned it sideways if you don't hold on and win that game. So we've talked about the quarterbacks. We've talked briefly about what Chris Ottman-Bell said. We've talked about the O-line. We've talked about the running back. So let's talk a little bit about, as you mentioned, there's some defensive transfers on the outside of that secondary, and in the middle of that secondary, that's where the strength and numbers of starts, numbers of minutes played, and so it's a unique mix, isn't it, in that secondary?
Yeah, for sure. I think when you look at Tyler Newbin and Jordan Howden, they've played a lot of football. They've played a lot of football together. And, talking with both of those guys this spring, they mentioned just the chemistry that they feel with each other, that they don't even have to make calls to each other to know what needs to happen to be on the same page. I think we've got two real high quality safeties at that spot to really anchor what that secondary can be. Justin Wally had a aplomb as a true freshman. I think we saw that, especially as the season continued on, and now he's back for a sophomore season. At the other cornerback spot, they've got a couple of transfers coming in Beanie Bishop and Ryan Stapp. And while they aren't the biggest guys, I think they've shown an ability to make plays on the ball and have some veteran savvy, and can also contribute on special teams, it looks like. So I think both of those guys, they're really high on, and you saw some of the fruits in spring practice of what they can contribute. I think PJ's mentioned this, and it stood out in spring ball as well, as kind of how Michael Flip Dixon has had a great spring. I mean, he looks the part. He almost looks like a linebacker at 6'2", 210 pounds, maybe a light linebacker and outside of the box linebacker, but playing nickel or playing safety, he's been all over the place. They had a video that the program put out to kind of promote the spring game, and he had a thumping tackle and an interception in that, I think 90-second video montage of highlights from the spring. And when I watched practice a few times when given the opportunity this spring, he was doing that same kind of thing. Interceptions, tackles behind the line of scrimmage, disruptive plays, just a playmaker. And I think we saw that in the Guaranteed Rate Bowl too. I think he made some plays in that one as well. So I think they're really high on him, and I think they need to fill in at nickel as well. Justice Harris played a lot of snaps at that spot, and if they're able to bring in that third safety and disguise what they do, what Joe Rossi's going to do, I think that's only going to benefit what this defense can be this fall.
Yeah, and you even go prior to Justice Harris, Chris Williamson played that, whatever you want to call it, it's kind of that hybrid, like you said, almost a linebacker at times and run support, and then you have to have the wheels to drop in pass coverage. I wonder, do you think that could be where they play Dixon the most, or, they could mix it up because he's got, like you said, he can kind of come in and run support because he's a bigger safety, so to speak. So I wonder if that might not be where some of his playing time will get ticketed.
Yeah, I think they want to, have their best 11 on the field, and he's right there with Howden and Newbin at the safety spot. So I think that's probably where I'd probably put him at nickel one at this point. I think that is just coming out of spring, and what PJ has said and what what's kind of been in the proof in the pudding through spring ball is I think that's probably the best spot for him going forward.
How about tea time? Terrell Smith, who when he's been healthy enough, he's played. He started as a freshman and then, it didn't play as much as a sophomore, started much of last year. And then the injury, I don't know if it was hamstring maybe or something. It didn't play much late. If he's healthy, he can be a factor on the outside too, right? Yeah,
for sure. He missed the start of spring ball, but he was practicing yesterday. It seems like it's a minor thing. It doesn't sound like he's going to play in the spring game, but a guy that's played a lot of football, guy who played as a true freshman, but then kind of had some struggles, had some confidence issues, but has stuck around and like you said, has played a lot of football and can be a guy that you're going to want depth at that spot. And he's a guy that has been there and done that.
Most of what we have just talked about here in the first almost half hour of our podcast is stuff that projects, like if you listen in 3 weeks, it's going to still be the same discussion. So I want to ask a couple of specifics. So if someone listens 3 weeks from now, they'll get to listen and find out, just how smart you are about a spring game, which might be played as we talk, might be played indoors or outdoors. Yeah. What is, and it's been interesting over PJ's time early. It was basically the first one I want to say was a scripted practice. Almost there wasn't a game aspect to it because he didn't have a lot of numbers up front. And then they've done, split up, have a captain's draft. They've done some stuff last year. And normally, the starters, especially the skills guys, play a series or two, and then the young guys. And then last year, the starters play the whole spring game. I mean, that was right down to the final play, if memory serves me correct. Like literally, the final play decided the game. First of all, you have a football background. What if you were running a program? How would you handle a spring game? That fine line between getting some experience for guys and some that in Chris Altman-Bell's case, he's been here 6 years. How much does he need to play? He told me this week he wants to play every down. I doubt that, but he did play every down last week. And then youngsters, and how do you think the spring game will unfold this week? Will we see veterans not play? Do you think we'll see some play a series, young guys getting a shot?
Yeah, you know what? I would give, some of the experienced guys, a taste, right? A series or two and then get them out. Obviously, given what happened with Chris Altman-Bell last August and how he had the horse collar tackle and had the start of his season really sidetracked.
Right.
I'd be very reluctant to play him really at all, just given that history, and maybe he's victim to, what's already happened before. But like you said, he's a 6th-year player. He doesn't have anything to prove. Maybe he wants to, get out there and kind of have a game-like environment after going through 15 practices. I totally get that. And that's why I think, maybe a series or two for some of the established guys and then get them out and hopefully everyone stays healthy. And then you turn over the keys to the young guys and kind of go from there. Yeah. I think, last year was probably the perfect opportunity for this program, right? With the COVID year, they had so many numbers. It was coming out of COVID that everybody was itching to go see sports, and they had a great crowd at Huntington Bank Stadium. It's unfortunate that this game might be moved inside, just given what's happened with this program with bad weather hitting them or COVID or all the different things that have been unfortunate when it comes to the spring game. But I think what's been interesting is PJ's been willing to mix it up and do some different things that kind of make it unique and different and a competition, even if you can't have a full-fledged game. And I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of wrinkles they have come Saturday. There are some alums that are going to be there. We got Bateman and Winfield and Coughlin and Kamal Martin. Those guys are going to be kind of acting coaches on both sides. So that's kind of fun to have those guys back there. It's interesting because when PJ mentioned it yesterday, it wasn't news that was out there that was happening yet. So it was kind of like, oh, okay, that's happening. Right. And then, Howden spoke afterwards, and I was like, when Winfield is here this weekend, and he was like, what? When Winfield's here? Like I was breaking the news to him that Winfield's going to be here, and what's it going to be like with him back and that whole thing. So I think it's fun for the players to have alums that come back and guys that have been first round picks or guys that have won Super Bowls before to come back and kind of have that connectivity with the alums. I think that kind of creates an element too. It'll be interesting to see how many times, if Rashad Bateman has Chris Altman-Bell, how many times they try to hit a go route deep, or, how many times Antoine Winfield sends Tyler Nubin on a safety blitz if that's allowed. Those kinds of fun little wrinkles that I think will be part of the spring game, because it's a celebration. On the Tuesday practice, it's kind of a grind. They're kind of at the end of spring ball and it's not as crisp, and you're kind of tired of hitting the same guys all the time. That a spring game is really an opportunity to kind of let loose before you have to put the pads away again, and hopefully they get the opportunity to have some fun on Saturday as well.
Yeah, and PJ has made it fun. I remember the last time the game was indoors, that was the first time we saw Daniel Fa'alele as a running back. Right. Remember in that spring game indoors? Yeah. He scored a touchdown in that game, and then they dusted off the playbook, or that play off the playbook, and did it again, of course, in the bowl game here this last December. So I'm sure there'll be a surprise or two with that as well. And as we mentioned, with Ibrahim and Potts neither playing, it does give a chance that these young guys, Evans especially, I would think, get an opportunity to showcase some skills. I wouldn't be surprised to see more of a traditional spring game as we know it, as opposed to last year where some of those backups didn't even play, right? Because of the way that thing unfolded. So I would think this is more of an evaluation thing, but who knows? We'll see. Like if Moriano Sori-Marin didn't play, that wouldn't be a surprise, right? He's been in the program enough, and it gives an opportunity for some other linebackers who might be called upon at some point, and certainly down the road, a chance to play, some of them maybe in front of, although if it moved inside, who knows, but some of them a chance to play in front of some people for the first time too. Yeah, for sure. I think, certainly at that position where you have guys that are coming back from injury, Cody Lindenberg, Josh Awney, guys that I'm sure are itching to play again. Yeah. I mean, all the veteran guys that are in their fifth, sixth year, I would be very reluctant to play, just knowing how valuable they are. So I think, kind of a series, a little bit of a taste, and then kind of hang it up and kind of cheer on the rest of the guys. So let's do a very early, everyone seems to do these, like the season ends and the next day everyone, it's very early preseason top 25 or whatever. Well, here we are approaching the end of April, looking ahead to May and then the off-season workouts. I won't ask you to give me a top 25 nationally, but I will ask you to kind of, if you can, take me through what you're seeing in the Big Ten West. Obviously, there's, different reports out. Most of them all have had their spring game. I'm sure you're in contact on occasion with some of your colleagues around the league as well about what's happening on the teams they're covering. So what are you hearing about the Big Ten West? And, it's interesting because everyone always says Wisconsin, and I'm certainly not going to not say Wisconsin, but Wisconsin's not been in the title game now. I think it's been once in 5 years. So Northwestern twice, Iowa once, and Wisconsin once in that group. So I guess it's once in the last 4 years. But it's always hard to overlook that group. So let's start there. What are you hearing from the team to the East? Yeah. I haven't followed too much spring ball, to be honest. Oh, I put you on the spot then, right? Yeah, I know. And I'm ill prepared for it too. I think, I was on with Sirius XM a week or so ago, and they asked kind of about the Big Ten West and where you think the Gophers are when it comes to that. And I think it's pretty obvious that, PJ is 0 against Iowa. And I think that's really the hurdle that he has to clear, that the program has to clear in order to get to Indianapolis. I think that's really the final hurdle for this team. I think they've shown that they can play and beat Wisconsin, but they haven't been able to do it against Iowa. So I can't tell you exactly where programs are coming out of spring ball, but I just know, just following this program for 5 years now, that Iowa City and coming here, the Hawkeyes, when they come to Minneapolis, has really been an issue for the Gophers. And regardless of who uses their timeouts and when they use their timeouts, that's really been the problem for the Gophers so far. Yeah, I think that's going to – and obviously that game is in Minneapolis this year, and the schedule is an interesting one because, man, there are some tough road games. You're at Wisconsin, you're at Penn State, you're at Michigan State. Michigan State's a mystery team. They were, on the verge of potentially being a playoff team last year, and then, ended up losing to Purdue and lost, that was built on transfers. Who knows who's all back, and I haven't followed it close. And then at Nebraska, and we don't know about Nebraska. Nebraska every year gets ranked high. They've lost a whole bunch of close games. So Purdue won 9 last year. That's a home game for you this year. But back to the Iowa discussion, because you can talk yourself into all kinds of stuff. Those are 4 hard road games that I just mentioned, and it's doubtful that you're going to sweep those. So you're going to have to take care of things at home, and that includes the Hawkeyes. And I remember we were at Northwestern this past year, and and this is not a knock on Northwestern anyway, because what they've been able to accomplish there, now they've got facilities to match what they're hoping. But they were, at that time, they were the defending West champs, and they had been in 2 of the previous 3 Big Ten championship games. And I remember your friend, Justin Gard, not my friend, your friend. We were still up in the radio booth, and we're looking down. There's 100 people in the stands. Now this was well before the game, but usually at the time, you're looking out at a most Big Ten places, there's a few thousand people starting to file in. It's like, man, how do they go to the 2 of the 3 last Big Ten championship games? I said, well, it's easy when you look at it. They beat Iowa a lot, and they beat Wisconsin sometimes. And if you can do that right now, as the West is constructed, you're going to find your way to Indianapolis. Now, the Gophers have beaten Wisconsin 2 of the last 4, but you're going to have to mix an Iowa win in there to end up there. So I think you're right on. And it's a home game this year. And so, and that's the weird thing with Iowa too, is that you can't pour too many eggs in the basket, and strategically, how do you go against those teams like Purdue? They've had success against Iowa. It's a weird circle how some of this works. Like PJ's done well against Purdue and not against Iowa. And on the flip side, Iowa has done well against PJ, but can't beat Purdue even when they're ranked number 2 in the country as they were last year. Yeah. Sometimes when you look at it, Purdue just, Jeff Brom just throws caution to the wind. He just throws. I do think Guardsy and I have talked about this, and you might have even been involved in a conversation where teams that play Iowa oftentimes, Iowa's, and they're so fundamentally sound. Like they've led the country in interceptions, I think total interception over the past 5 years. And people are always like, well, can that sustain? And I'm like, why they lead the league is because they're so fundamentally sound. They're in the right spot all the time. And if you're always in the right spot, you're going to have interceptions. You just are how they play. So I think sometimes coaches will go into that game. We can't make a mistake. Yeah. And Jeff Brom's like, to hell with that. We're going to throw all over the place. And Bell had like the most yards in the history of the Big Ten on them last year, even though they were in the right spot. So I do think there are times where against a team like that, if we can't make a mistake, you almost play into their hands, and it's a self-fulfilling deal. And they're going to play hard, close games. They always do. Iowa does. And when you do that a lot, you get good at winning close games. And they have done that over the years.
Yeah. When you look at how conservative the Gophers were at Iowa City last year, and how they were willing to take shots and be aggressive when they hosted Wisconsin at the end of the year, and you see the results of those 2 games, I think that kind of leads into your point that if you are aggressive and if you try to make plays, that can be to your advantage. If you kind of hit on the front foot, if you're aggressive at the start, I think that bodes well. I'm a little bummed that the Iowa game got moved to the end of the year. I really look forward to the fact of that being in September and kind of really setting the tone. Obviously, it's kind of been at the end of the year with Wisconsin for a number of years now, and it's kind of tradition to kind of have that at the end. But having it early, I think, would really have been interesting. I was looking forward to that, and then when they redid the schedule, moving it back just kind of, I don't know, took a little bit of the intrigue out of the schedule, just given what it's been for so long.
Yeah, that was going to be a tone setter. Now there's other games that can serve as the tone setter, but that's for sure, you're right, was going to be. I recall, I think the Gophers, was it Jerry Kill's second or third year, opened. They started 4-0, and they opened down in Iowa City. And that's one of the few times, and I grew up in Iowa, so I followed that program, over the years. For when I was growing up, the last game of the year was always Minnesota and Iowa. And then it switched to Wisconsin sometime, I want to say in the late 90s, early 2000s. And now Iowa closes with Nebraska on Black Friday once they join the league. So, that has always been, a good, obviously the Iowa Minnesota thing's always been a good rivalry, but it hasn't for years now been the last game, but it's always been a week or two ahead of that Wisconsin game, which always set up how important that last game would be, except for that one year. Jerry's team started 4-0 one year and went to Iowa City, and just early just got the crowd was ready to go, and the struggle continued. I forget, they jumped out to a lead. That had to be maybe the 2014 season. I'd have to look it up, but it was early in Jerry's tenure. So that's one of the few times I remember it being early.
Yeah, that would have been a good year for 2014. Wasn't that the year they went to the Citrus Bowl? That would have been, was it 14? Yeah. 14 or 15.
I've got a media guide here. I should.
Grimmer, I got a question for you.
Yeah, I'm ready.
How do you feel about the rumors of them going away from the East and West divisions and maybe just having one conference? How do you feel about that rumor that's out there? Because it's been something that's been, 5, 6, 7 years now of East and West, and I've really grown fond of kind of having those teams every year and just knowing what it's going to be like to maybe go away from that. I don't know. I'm a little hesitant about that.
Yeah, I'm down on it. It was 2013. I found my media guide here. 2013, Gophers were 4-0. They beat UNLV, big, New Mexico State, Western Illinois, and San Jose State. And then at Iowa, they were 4-0. And I think Iowa was 4-0 too. And then Iowa blitzed them early and it ended 23-7. So that was September 28th. And I don't remember. I think the 51-14 game was the next year, the Citrus Bowl year, when Max Williams had that big game. Yeah. And that game was in November. So that's the only time off the top of my head I can remember that game being early. That opened the Big Ten season that year. And actually the year before as well, in 2012. It might be 2012 I'm thinking of. It was 2012. That was 31-13. And then Iowa came here in September to open the Big Ten season in 13. So 2012 was the year I was thinking of. Both those years, Jerry started 4-0. But anyway, back to your question. Yeah. I am a proponent of what I think might be best for Minnesota, right? And I think what might be best for Minnesota is to stay in the divisions. And not open it up the way they want. And honestly, I have to look into this more. And I know, there's been some articles. I know our guy Scott Dockerman down in Iowa has written about that, because the AD at Iowa is kind of, he's overseeing a lot of the football stuff now. Gary Barta, who's a Twin Cities native. But I'm still struggling with what the benefit is outside of pleasing Penn State, which maybe that's the goal. Penn State's been complaining about being, they look and see Wisconsin and Iowa and who do they have to play? Well, look, the West, honestly, the West from teams 1 through 6 is probably as good as the East. The East also gets to play, some teams that haven't traditionally been that great, but you throw Ohio State in the mix and what they've been for the last 10 years. And, so I see why Penn State says, hey, outside of that, I don't get I don't think it helps the Big Ten in the sense that they would think it would. I think, especially if they don't expand the playoffs. Now, I think the discussion is if they expand the playoffs, then they would do away with the divisions, right? And I have to think more. I have to really almost write it down on paper to see why. Because to me, wouldn't there be times where if you take the top 2 teams, you're running the risk of team number 2 getting knocked out of the playoff altogether, where there's been a couple of years where, Ohio State made the playoffs one year, right? By not playing in the Big Ten championship game. I think Penn State won the league tiebreaker, but Ohio State had the better, overall work of whatever you want to call it. And did Penn State, I can't remember, Penn State won or lost that championship game, but I don't wouldn't you run the risk more? Like if you have, like last year, for example, right? Mm-hmm. So Ohio State's kind of waiting in the wings. If Iowa pulls the upset and beats Michigan, Ohio State might be in the playoff, right?
Yeah, it might have been. Yeah.
Where if Ohio State and Michigan both play, the winner's going to go, but if the playoff gets expanded now, wouldn't you run like last year, if it was an expanded playoff, Ohio State's going no matter what. But now what happens if those 2 teams play? The loser could miss out on a spot, right?
Yeah.
I guess. I don't know. I have to write down now. Someone may tweet at me and say, you're an idiot. Here's why it is more important to do this way. But I struggle with what the benefit of the Big Ten is as well. To me, it would seem they're putting another team at risk of an important loss late in the season. When if they're just tucked away as the second best team in the Big Ten, that's not a bad spot to be in an expanded playoff situation. Don't put anything at risk of them losing again, right?
Right. Yeah, I don't look at it so much from a playoff perspective. It's just like a continuity tradition standpoint, right? I just think it makes sense to have the 17. Obviously, we're talking relatively speaking, right? Because Nebraska's new and divisions are new and all of that. But it just feels like I know that it's, kind of recency bias, but it just feels like it works. It just makes sense to kind of have divisions, to kind of have two separate competitions going on, to kind of add some more layers of intrigue to the regular season. That's how I look at it. I didn't think about the big picture about the playoff, but I just feel like what would be the appeal of being, the 6th, 7th, 8th team, 4th team in the Big Ten when you're like, it just feels like it'd be muddled down by the group. If that's the case of the 14 teams, where if you have two different pots, then you're like, hey, this is the road to the Big Ten championship game. And you have a little bit more of a shot, and it's a little bit more of a clear channel as opposed to kind of a muddle one big pot.
Well, and you'd protect a couple rivalries, but in a 14 team league, I get on one side, you're like, you haven't played Ohio State very often. Now they opened last year and that was a great atmosphere and it was fun. Yeah. Would a format where they eliminate divisions allow you to play a big time program like that a little more often? Probably. I don't just yearn for, we have to play Purdue every year. God love Purdue. Yeah. That said, you would probably in Minnesota's case, protect Wisconsin and Iowa. I think they should play Nebraska every year as well. And I'm sure people in Iowa, if they only can protect two, right? Yeah. You almost have to make it in pods that you're going to protect. Because if you're not, you can't not play Wisconsin and Minnesota every year. It's the longest running continuous rivalry right now in the history of college football, right? So that's going to play every year. That thing's for sure, as it should be. And so can you protect 3? Can you protect 4? And if you're doing that, then you might as well just keep the divisions, right?
Yeah, I would think so. And then you also have, if you have those as the protected rivalries and those are the better teams in the Big Ten West, then are the other teams more benefited more? Do you get more Northwestern Nebraska games? And,
right. Well, and you're right. So if you protect that group and now all of a sudden Purdue protects Northwestern and Illinois and Indiana, now you might have Wisconsin saying, hold on a second, we're playing Minnesota, Iowa, and Nebraska every year, and these guys are playing. And again, it can flip. So I'm just going on, recent history. And Minnesota's not exactly, been a juggernaut over the years. And I'm sure someone listening, from some other team might say, what's he talking about? But, in general terms, they've twice in the last 3 years had a chance to go to Indy, Minnesota. So it's different than Illinois. And Illinois most recently has been, to major bowl games in Minnesota. But if all of a sudden you're protecting in Indiana, Purdue, and Northwestern and Illinois as a 4 pod, that probably is the way they'd want to, protect that rivalry, because Indiana and Illinois have got a great rivalry. Illinois and Northwestern have a great rivalry. Indiana and Purdue clearly have the Old Oak and Bucket. Well, that pod now all of a sudden, based on the last 10 years, is not a real great pod, right? I mean, Northwestern's had, a couple of nice years.
Yeah.
But anyway, so if you're going to protect that many, you might as well keep the divisions.
Yeah. Right. I know it's kind of a tangent, but I don't know. I just feel like I'm a fan of East and West and just kind of how it's played out. I think it's it just feels natural. It just feels good, even though it's a recent thing in the last 8 years.
Yeah, so. I agree. I agree. And you keep, there's some regional, you keep some regional rivalries involved, and it's important, and fans get comfortable with certain things. And so, as I said, in the main picture, somebody maybe can tell me what I'm missing about why it's better in an expanded playoff for the Big Ten. I don't fully get that, but apparently there are people that think that it would be. So maybe sometime we can have Scott on, because I know he has he's dived into that more than I have anyway, and he can explain it to me what the benefit is. Because to me, adding a loss to one of your top 2 teams in an expanded playoff the last week of the season isn't a good thing for the Big Ten, because you're putting that team at risk to lose. Where if they're just tucked away with 11-1, and you're up against other teams, that's okay, particularly if other conferences stay with divisions. But real quickly, I want to ask you about men's basketball. A couple of transfers here. Obviously, Dawson Garcia is the headliner. That's the one name that people recognize here from Prior Lake. What's your thought on what is happening here this offseason with the Gopher men's basketball team?
Yeah, they needed some additions. They needed a point guard. They needed a big, and they were probably able to do as best as they possibly could with the big and Dawson Garcia. Obviously people know that he's a McDonald's All-American, a guy who was at Marquette, and then North Carolina, a 4-star recruit, a guy who's really been a high prospect at the first two places that he went to, is able to come home and have a year here with the Gophers at 6'11", very versatile type player. I think it's probably the best that they could have done. It kind of really was a perfect storm to be able to bring him back, as he's had some family health issues. And if he's able to get that waiver, it sounds like he, as he said, kind of unfortunately has a very compelling case to be able to do that. And you hope that, while it didn't work out for Marcus Carr, you hope that it works out for a guy like Dawson Garcia, and the NCAA kind of gets it and he's able to play right away. If that's the case, then that's great for the Gopher basketball team. Talon Cooper, the transfer from Morehead State, a guy who is a true point guard. I think he was top 15 in assists, top 15 in assist to turnover ratio. A guy who shoots it at a pretty good clip. Seems like a really good leader. It's interesting to see a guy who is able to step up to the Big Ten level and say, well, I think I might just do 1 year because I'm going to graduate. I think that shows that, he's a good kid and has his head on straight. So I think that's impressive as well. I think, you needed a point guard, Peyton Willis leaving, bringing in a guy I think he's played nearly 100 college basketball games is a really big get for them, and kind of winning in the transfer portal they were able to do last year with a lot of guys. And it seems like they're having great success so far this offseason. They've
got the 4 incoming freshmen as well that will likely start in the summer. Do you think they're done, or do you think they'll add one more transfer?
It sounds like they've got one more spot, and it sounds like Thiem, their freshman point guard, has entered the portal as well, so they might have another spot as well. So I think they'll probably keep looking. I think they need another guard, another off guard. I know there's a short list of guys that they've had in on visits as well. So I'd imagine that they're going to keep trying to prod and poke around and add maybe 1 or 2 more now.
St. Paul Pioneer Press, how can people read your stuff?
Yeah, twincities.com and in the printed paper. It's still out there, man.
It's awesome. And how about Twitter? Can they follow you there and other avenues?
Yeah, at Andy Greder on Twitter.
Great, man. It's been fun. We should share the story about you and I and the group breaking bread together in Indiana at my favorite place, Zagreb's. You were lucky enough to get to sit right next to me and across the way from our buddies Ron Johnson and Daryl Thompson and some others in the traveling party. That was a fun night out in Bloomington for football. Yeah, that's a great downtown. I didn't know the history of Zagreb's and Bobby Knight bringing recruits there. It's just like a very supper clubby type vibe in that place. That was great. And then there's, other watering holes within a couple of blocks as well. That was my first, talk about, Big Ten scheduling. That was my first trip to Indiana. That was the first Gophers trip there in a long time. I've been on the beat 7 years. That was the first time that I've been to Bloomington. This year will be the first time I'm going to East Lansing. It's fun to go to Big Ten cities that I haven't been to, or Big Ten cities I haven't been to in a while. It's fun to have a few drinks and have dinner before games when we can a few times. Yeah, no doubt. Well, hey, we'll look forward to East Lansing, your maiden voyage to East Lansing this fall.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Thanks, Andy. We appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks, Karen.
There he is, the great Andy Greder from the St. Paul Pioneer Press. I hope you enjoyed hearing his insights on Golden Gopher athletics, the Big Ten, and more. The Go Gopher podcast is presented by Sunbelt Business Advisors and True North Mergers and Acquisitions. If you're buying or selling a business, visit sunbeltminnesota.com or tnma.com today. We're also sponsored by State Farm agent Tony Hoagland. Brandon Morton is our producer and technical expert. Again, I'd invite you to listen to past podcasts, and please be sure to hit the subscribe button to the Go Gopher podcast right now. It's absolutely free to listen. We'll talk again next week.